Hello everyone, I'm Diigii and I'm excited to give you another Shadow Priest Mythic Plus guide video for patch 10.0.7. This video has been requested a lot, so I've tried my best to make a new guide video as soon as possible. There are lots and lots of things to tell you about Shadow Priest, but of course we can't talk about them all in just one video. So I'll be trying to stick to the most important things you should know about Shadow Priest. So what I did is I divided this video into different sections to explain different kinds but very important topics. These topics are a general overview of the Shadow Priest. I'll talk about abilities and the priority of abilities. We're talking about the stats of the Shadow Priest, the most important talents, which are on the right side, and the most important talents, the left side of the priest. So the right side are the shadow abilities and the left side are like the general priest abilities. We'll be talking about the rotation of the Shadow Priest, maybe the most important one. We'll be talking about macros, and last but not least, add-ons and weak auras, etc. Whatever I have to tell you. Of course, there are a lot of other topics I could talk about, but I'll stick to the basics. And if you think I've been forgetting something very important, just leave a comment below. Or if you have any other questions after watching the video, you could also drop by on the twitch.tv/Diigii. Or you can leave a comment, as I said before in the video. I'll be responding to each of them. If it's regarding my UI or something else, just leave a comment and I'll be in touch. So yeah, let's get into the video. The first topic is a general overview of the Shadow Priest, starting with the most important spells. You have two very important spells, which are the Vampiric Touch and the Shadow Word Pain ability. Both abilities are damage over time abilities, which means they do a certain amount of damage over a period of 21 seconds. Why are these important? Well, with the talent Psychic Link, which we will talk about later, all the mobs that have Vampiric Touch on them will be linked together. This means if you hit one mob with your Mind Blast, monster number 2 will also receive damage, as long as you apply Vampiric Touch to it. This means apply as many Vampiric Touch to as many mobs as you can. Shadow Word Pain will be applied automatically when we apply Vampiric Touch to the target. This is because of the talent Misery. The next important ability is Shadow Crash. This is a bolt of energy that you throw at the enemy, which automatically applies a Vampiric Touch to up to 8 targets. Very handy, of course, because this means you don't have to manually apply dots to the targets. It's a very important tip when you're in a fight with more than 8 monsters, mobs, and the tank is still pulling everything together. You should apply manually dots on the mobs, probably that are the furthest away, and you throw the Shadow Crash in the group on the other mobs. This is so you apply as many dots as possible. This will happen lots of times, because most pulls, especially in higher keys, consist of more than 8 monsters. Your first Insanity spending ability is called Devouring Plague, and this is a very strong damage over time ability, which lasts 6 seconds and is being used in single target fights or fights with up to 2 mobs. This dot will also heal you for 30% of the damage dealt. If you already applied Devouring Plague to a target and you reapply it, the remaining damage of the first Devouring Plague will be added to the new Devouring Plague. So don't worry about overcapping Insanity. You can just spam the ability as soon as you think you're overcapping on Insanity, and the damage will be applied to the new Devouring Plague. Last but not least, Mindsear. Mindsear is a channeling ability which does shadow damage over 3 seconds to all enemies within 10 yards of the target. The target could either be a friend or an enemy, but I usually suggest putting it on an enemy. In patch 10.0.5 we will still use Mindsear in AoE situations, but it will change in 10.1. You will use Mindsear when there are 3 or more targets. You can only use Mindsear when you have like 50% or more Insanity, and each tick will drain 25% Insanity. So if you have like 100% Insanity, it will do like a full rotation of Mindsear, but you could also use it at 75% and it will stop after 3 ticks. Alrighty, onto the stats. The 3 important stats for Shadow Priest. The first stat is intellect. Usually a higher eye level gives you more intellect, and which is very good for a Shadow Priest. The higher your intellect, the more damage you'll do. So intellect is your most important stat. Secondly, we want to have as much haste as possible. Haste increases the attack speed and spellcasting speed, which is very good, especially for Mind Seer, Mind Flay and things like that. And it's just a very good stat. This also applies to pets, by the way. So your pets also benefit from your haste. That's why you also have Power Infusion, one of the talents, which gives you 25% more haste. Thirdly, Mastery, a very important stat as well. This increases the effectiveness of shadow weaving, aka more dot damage. For example, when you have 14% mastery, this will mean your dots will do 14% more damage. So these are the 3 most important stats. So intellect is your most important one. Then go for haste and try and get as much haste as possible. And thirdly, focus on mastery. Critical strike and versatility are on the bottom of your priority, so don't focus on those stats. Onto the talents. The talent build that will pop on the screen contains one of the most used talents in Mythic Plus, because it uses all the single target and AoE abilities to do big damage. Of course, you don't want to focus too much on single target, you don't want to focus too much on AoE, so an in-between is just perfect with this build. I noticed that there can be some differences in tyrannical and fortified weeks, but overall you should be more than fine using this build. I noticed even on high keys, 25s, 26 or higher, that this build is still viable. So let's get into the talents. Let's start with Misery. Misery, we talked about this before. When you cast a Vampiric Touch on your enemy, it also applies Shadow Word Pain. So more dots means more damage. It's almost a no-brainer to pick this one. Your next talent is Mind Seer. Mind Seer causes a explosion of magical damage around the target. As I said before, it could be a friendly target or an enemy target, but always prefer targeting an enemy. So it does damage in an AoE radius within 10 yards of the target. So this is your main AoE spending ability, and cast this on when you have 3 or more targets. Psychic Link, one of the most important talents right now and for sure in the next patch 10.1. When you cast Mind Blast, Mind Flay, Mind Spike, Mind Games, Void Bolt and Void Torrent, the damage that you deal to one target, 60% of that damage will be dealt to all the other targets afflicted by your Vampiric Touch within 40 yards. That means when you have 2 targets that are afflicted with Vampiric Touch, when you hit one target, the other target will also receive damage. 60% of the damage that you deal to the main targets, which is huge of course. So keep in mind, only Devouring Plague doesn't currently work with Psychic Link, but that will change in patch 10.1 as well. As I said before, it's very important to dodge mobs, enemies with Vampiric Touch to do as much Psychic Link damage as possible. Mind Spike and Surge of Darkness. Mind Spike is an initial damage dealing ability just like Mind Blast, but together with Surge of Darkness, your Vampiric Touch and Devouring Plague damage has a chance to cause your next Mind Spike to be instant cast and deal 200 additional damage, and this stacks up to 3 times. So this means you'll deal 200% more damage, initial damage, but also compared with Psychic Link, you'll do a lot of damage to all the other mobs as well. Void Torrent, very strong ability. It also works with Psychic Link, which is huge. But with Void Torrent, you channel a torrent of energy onto the target, dealing a lot of the spell power and shadow damage over 3 seconds time. Shadow Crash, we talked about that earlier in the video, so we'll skip this one for now. So the next talent is Void Eruption. It's like your ultimate ability, and when you cast it, it releases an explosive blast of energy, And when you activate Void Form, it causes shadow damage to all enemies within 10 yards of your target. So the more mobs there are together, the more damage you'll do. Small tips, or at least a couple tips that are very important. You should use Void Eruption together with Power Infusion, another talent, because they share the same cooldown. When you cast a Void Eruption, you also get a new ability. It will be the same one, but it transfers in another ability called Void Bolt. And the cool thing about Void Bolt, it also works with Psychic Link. And it's a low cooldown and does a lot of damage. So Void Bolt is the main priority on getting it off as many times as possible. In single target fights, in AoE fights, etc, etc. Cooldown is low, so use it as often as you can. Another very good talent for Shadow Priest is Mind Devourer. This talent makes sure that your Mind Blast has a 20% chance to make your next Devouring Plague or Mind Seer cost no insanity, which is huge. So when you're in an AoE fight and you cast Mind Blast and maybe you get like one of those Mind Seer procs, you can get a full 3-second charge of Mind Seer, which does a lot of AoE damage, which is huge of course. When you are in a fight and you have one of those procs that gives you a free Devouring Plague or Mind Seer, be sure to use it ASAP. Because it would be a shame if you cast another Mind Blast and you get another proc, it will just replace the first proc. There are no stacks, so you don't get 2 free casts of Mind Seer, it's just only 1. So be sure to use it as often as you can. It's the Idol of Yogg-Saron. When you conjure a Shadow Apparition, you gain a stack of Idol of Yogg-Saron. And when you are 25 stacks, it will summon a Thing from Beyond that serves you for 20 seconds. And the Thing from Beyond blasts the enemy for some spell power and deals shadow damage and deals 30% of the damage to all enemies within 10 yards. So it's a single target boost but also a AoE boost. However, damage is reduced beyond 5 targets. Last not but least, the last thing I want to mention about the Shadow Priest part of the talents is Idol of Sethune. Mind Flay and Mind Seer have a chance to spawn a Void Tendril or a Void Lasher that channels at your target for 15 seconds. And it will generate 3 Insanity every 1 second. So it's a small single target boost. So that's why this build is like made for AoE but also for some single target boost. Especially on tyrannical weeks, it's almost a must-have. Alright, I want to be brief on the Priest tree talent, the left side of the talent tree. And I want to mention a couple important talents. The first talent is Shadow Word Death, which is an instant cast damage ability. It does quite some damage, but the real thing is, when you damage an enemy below 20% health, you will do increased 150% damage on that mob. And if you pick the right talent, you can even cast it twice. So twice 150% increased damage is of course very huge, especially on single target fights. So another small tip, if a boss has 100% health and you know he won't reach 20% health within, for example, 20 seconds, you can just cast Shadow Word Death. Just be sure when you hit the 20% health mark to keep Shadow Word Death. Twist of Fate, small damage increase talent. After you damage or heal a target below 35% health, you gain 10% increased damage and healing for 8%, which is pretty nice. We all know that Shadow Priests are known for their off healing, so that's why we pick a Vampiric Embrace, because it causes you to heal a nearby ally for 50% of any single target shadow spell damage you deal, which is huge. It helps your healer a lot, it helps your party a lot, so use this as often as possible. A small tip is you can use a Vampiric Embrace, for example, together with your Power Infusion. You can macro them together, which is huge of course. I'll post the macro later on in the video. Mass Dispel and improved Mass Dispel. Of course, you can AoE dispel people, which is huge. Very handy in bursting weeks, but also very handy in dungeons like Court of Stars, when you can Mass Dispel the whole group just before the first boss, or in Azure Vault for example. The last talent I want to mention is Mind Games. It's a pretty cool talent. When you cast Mind Games on an enemy for 5 seconds, the next damage they deal will heal their target, which is of course pretty awesome. And the next healing they'll deal will damage their targets. So it's like a bit of a reversing on the enemy. So here we are, the rotation of the Shadow Priest. Maybe for most of you, the most important part of the video. I hope you're still with me on this. Sometimes it's a bit difficult to explain the rotation, because there are like many factors in a dungeon that allow you to do certain things or that prevents you from doing certain things. So I'll explain the rotation the way I like it. When you start a fight, you want to throw a Shadow Crash at the target, at a group of mobs, because Shadow Crash will dot up to 8 targets within a group. And it will give them a Vampiric Touch and a Shadow of Pain because we picked Misery. If there are more than 8 targets, I usually prefer to manually dot the targets that are the furthest away, and then throw the Shadow Crash in the group. So usually when the mobs that are the furthest away, they'll run towards the tank, so it gives me also some time to throw the Shadow Crash in the group of mobs that don't have a dot yet. So it won't accidentally dot the other ones that already manually dotted. So that's very important to keep in mind. After the Shadow Crash, you want to cast your Shadow Fiend. After the Shadow Fiend, you want to cast Mind Blast 2 times. And why? Because Mind Blast resets when you cast Void Eruption. Now of course you want to have as much Insanity as possible, so it's just a waste if you don't use them. So always use Mind Blast 2 times before you cast Void Eruption. After the Mind Blast, you can use, for example, a potion as well. Sometimes I also prefer using the potion before the Mind Blast, so it gives me a little bit of extra damage. So Mind Blast 2 times, maybe use a potion. And then I like to cast Power Infusion. Most guys recommend to cast a Void Eruption before Power Infusion, but I like the extra haste that I get from Power Infusion to cast Void Eruption a little bit faster. So it saves me a little bit of time in mob fights, so in the group fights, which helps a lot. And also be sure to macro your Power Infusion together with your Vampiric Embrace, for example. Or if you have twins of the Sun Priestess, you want to maybe make a macro that's a little bit smarter, so you also target another person with the Power Infusion, which gives you and the person you're targeting the Power Infusion buff. So that's what you have with the Twins of the Sun Priestess talent. You always pick this talent, by the way. After the Power Infusion, you want to cast a Void Eruption. And as we said before, Void Eruption resets our Mind Blast. But before we cast a Mind Blast, we want to cast a Void Bolt directly after Void Eruption. So Void Eruption changes into Void Bolts, and you just want to spam click the Void Eruption and you cast directly 1 Void Bolt. After the Void Bolt, you cast Mind Blast 2 times. And now it really depends how much Insanity you have. If you have around 100 Insanity, I like to spend it on a Mind Seer next. If I don't have 100 Insanity, I'll cast Mind Games. And then I'll cast Mind Seer, then I'm almost 100% sure you'll have 100 Insanity. So it really depends on how much Insanity you have. If you have 100 Insanity, cast Mind Seer, that's what I like to do. If not, cast Mind Games before. And once you spend all your Insanity, the last thing you want to do is cast Void Torrent. It's a very strong ability, but yeah, you want to prioritize everything else, and then you want to prioritize Void Torrent. Now for a little demonstration. So as you can see, I'll start the fight with a Shadow Crash. I'm casting my Shadow Fiend next. I will do the 2 Mind Blasts. After that I'll do the Power Infusion, Void Bolt as soon as I'm in the Void form. I'll cast the 2 Mind Blasts again. I'll do a Mind Seer just for the sakes of it. After that I'll do the Mind Games, and to end it I'll do the Void Torrent. Besides the rotation that you just saw, there are a couple of priorities that are important for a Shadow Priest. There are a lot of abilities you can cast, a lot of procs you can get. So what are the most important abilities you should cast? So Once you did your rotation, the priority should be Void Bolt, very important. A low cooldown and does a lot of damage, and it works with Psychic Link. Then you should prioritize Mind Blast and always have at least one Mind Blast of cooldown. You have 2 stacks of Mind Blast when you have the right talents, so always make sure you have at least one on cooldown. Then you should cast Devouring Plague or Mind Sear to spend your Insanity. Shadow of Death, also very important, maybe even more important when the mob is under 20% HP. So that's always a little bit difficult for me as well, so what's the most important thing? But always keep in mind Shadow of Death, under 20% health, with a mob does a lot of damage. Second last ability should be your Mind Spike procs. So you've done everything, you got your Mind Blast of cooldown, you cast your Devouring Plague, you don't have Void Bolt on, your Shadow of Death has been cast, and you should do the Mind Spike procs, the Mind Spike procs only. And Mind Flay should be your last priority. Of course, it can be a little bit different with Mind Flay Insanity. So sometimes it's a little bit hard, what should I prioritize? In single target fights, Mind Flay Insanity is also very good, and it generates some extra Insanity. So sometimes I like to pick Mind Flay Insanity over the Mind Spike procs. So this is in general what I keep in mind when doing my AoE rotation. So we're nearly at the end of the guide video, so I want to end this video with some macros and weak auras that I use. We won't go into too many details about the macros and weak auras, but I just want to mention them. First macro is my Power Infusion macro. It will cast a Power Infusion on someone else, and because we use the Twins of the Sun Priestess talents, it will also cast Power Infusion on myself, so on both players. It also includes my Vampiric Embrace. In a lot of situations I just use this one just to help the healer a little bit every time I cast my Power Infusion, and I'm also using my Trinket at the same macro. The next macro is my Shadow Crash. Normally when you click your Shadow Crash ability you have to put it somewhere on the ground with like the big circle, but with this macro it will always cast Shadow Crash at the location of my mouse, which is really helpful. It just saves me a little bit of time and just makes me a little bit more immersed about my rotation, and it helps me a lot, of course. Then we have my Silence macro. It will just help me hover over, mouse over someone else, and I can silence them. Very easy, very helpful when interrupting mobs. Then we have my Dispersion macro. It's just a little bit better way to use Dispersion and get out of Dispersion. The normal Dispersion sometimes is a little bit clunky, so that's why I have a macro for it. So I'm always 100% sure that it will cast Dispersion or will cancel Dispersion whenever I want. The last macro is my Leap of Faith macro. I don't use it that often in dungeons, but it's really helpful in raids. It just helps me mouse over someone else, and I press Q and I Leap of Faith that person towards me. Very helpful in a lot of situations, and you really need a mouse over macro to be a little bit faster than just clicking on someone, Leap of Faith, and then you lose the targets that you're already attacking, so you lose DPS. So that's not what you want. You want to be as quick as possible, and that's what makes you, of course, a better player, by using those mouse over macros. Okay, for the last part, weak auras. Actually only using one weak aura at the moment, at least Shadow Priest specific. And that's just a weak aura to indicate that I'm out of shadow form. Sometimes when you die, you won't re-enter shadow form immediately. Sometimes you do. I don't know why, but it's just a little bit of a reminder that you don't lose out on DPS, and you can't even cast certain abilities when you're not in shadow form. So that's what I'm using. Of course, I have many other weak auras for raiding and other things. But dungeons mostly I don't. But yeah, then you have like other add-ons for it. But that's I'll cover that in another video. So this is the end of the video. It's been a long ride. Editing the video right now, it's 25 minutes. Holy moly, I don't think I've ever made a video that long. I'm not even sure how long my first one was, but I want to thank you all. I hope it will give you at least a little bit of information on how to play Shadow Priest. It can be a quite difficult spec. It'll change in 10.1. Then we will receiving a couple of changes. Some certain abilities will be removed from our talent tree, from our talent book, from our spell book. So it's gonna be huge. I'm looking forward to it. But if you have any questions, leave a comment. Come by at twitch.tv/Diigii. And if you like the video, appreciate it, like and subscribe. And yeah, I hope I'll see you next time. And I hope you all have a wonderful day.